Hey dudes, and welcome back to The Bance. As always, I am your host, The Bance, and I am super excited to finally announce our first ever annual list week, where I'm basically going to be discussing my favorites in a variety of different categories on things that I discussed over the last year. And up first in this video, we will be discussing my top 10 favorite artists from last year. And no, I'm not talking about musicians, musical artists. I'm talking about fine artists and street artists and graffiti artists and everything in between. And just a few quick things before we get into the list. Just so you guys know, I'm talking about individual artists here. So anybody that did a group show or a group exhibition that might have had to revolve around a similar idea or anything like that, they're not included. We're talking strictly solo people here. And even though, yes, I am ranking everything by number in this list, I would take all of that with a grain of salt, mainly because even as I found myself reviewing this list, I think I ended up changing it at least 3 times. So what I'm really trying to say here is that really all of these artists are fantastic and worth checking out, but don't consider by any means the number 1 artist any better or worse than the number 10. They're all absolutely excellent. And finally, of course, if you do want to check out any of these artists that I do mention on this list, I will be linking to some of their works in the description down below. But now with all of that out of the way, let's finally move on into our list. And starting us off, we have our honorable mentions, because I mean, let's be real here. Did you actually expect me to just be able to whittle down this list to just 10 artists after I talked about everybody I talked about last year? Nah. And up first, I just wanted to rapid fire 3 major artists who, even though yes, they do deserve to be on this list, they're already very renowned and popular in their own rights, and I really wanted to kind of reserve this list for people that needed a little bit more limelight in my opinion, and these guys already have plenty of that. And those 3 artists are Takashi Murakami for his Octopus Eats Its Own Leg exhibit, which has been traveling the world. Gemeos for pretty much really everything they've done this year. And last but definitely not least, Todd James for his many exhibits as well. If you consider yourself a fan of pop art and vibrant and colorful art across a bunch of different mediums, and you for whatever reason haven't heard of these 4 artists before, I can't recommend enough checking them out. Yes, they may be a little more popular and a little bit more entry level, but that doesn't make them any less good. And speaking of some rather famous artists that deserve to be on this list, up next we have Felipe Pantone, who has absolutely become enormous over the last couple of years. And even though yes, there's a number of factors that put him on this list, aside from even his art, just his introduction of modular art over the last couple months as well, the fact of the matter is that he's just way too big now, and at the very least, if I can't put him in the top 10, he at least deserves to be here. And the last but definitely not least of our honorable mentions, I had to of course put Conor Harrington on this list. Now I'm sure as some of you are aware by now, when it comes to pretty much anything political, I try and stay as far away from it as I possibly can on this channel, which can definitely be hard at times because when we're talking about such creative outlets as art and fashion, politics tend to show up a lot. But even with that in mind, just taking a look at Conor's works here, even if I couldn't feel myself putting them in the top 10, at the very least they deserve nothing less than an honorable mention. Even though these subjects in the paintings here are definitely taken from a much more historical sense, the ideas that they're trying to portray and their combative nature are just as relevant, if not now more than ever. And the way Conor uses different painting methods in these works here, not even just in the traditional sense, but we're also seeing scrapes and swipes and drips, only goes further at personifying the chaos we're currently enduring in our own political environments. So whether you find yourself being a fan of historical works or political works, or even just different and interesting brushstroke styles, I cannot recommend checking out Conor's work here enough. Alright, and now with our honorable mentions done, it is finally time to move on to our main list. And starting us off at number 10, it is none other than Alicia McCarthy. Now, I know I might get some shit out there from some of you for putting her on this list, but I really don't care. I love a ton of her works, so I put her at number 10. That's my compromise to you. Now, I must admit, when it comes to art as a whole, some of my favorite all-time artists are known for some of the simplest things. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with simple art. Some of the greatest pieces I've ever seen are simple. And believe me, I consider these up here with some of those greats. Sure, you may be saying that anybody could have done these. I could have done these, you could have done these. But the fact of the matter is that I didn't do them, you didn't do them, and nobody else did them, except Alicia. Alicia did them. She came up with the idea, she chose the colors, she painted the canvas, and she left whatever impurities she felt needed to be there. And what we're left with are some amazing works that are simply and uniquely hers. Alright, and at number 9, we have something that is radically different than what we just saw, and it comes to us in the form of Chuck Sperry. And really, just taking a glance at them, how could you possibly not like these? Also, quick side note, from this point on, get ready to see a lot of very similar ideas and me describing paintings in very similar ways, because from here on out, this is where the trends really start to show themselves. But going back to the paintings at hand, I think these are all just an absolutely wonderful take on the psychedelic scene. It almost feels as if Chuck himself was able to dip his hand back into that era and rip out these pieces from then with all of their color and vibrance still intact. But even possibly more brilliant than the colors in these works is the amount of layering seen here, especially when you compound all the patterns that come along hand in hand with them. And when you combine all three of these factors together, what's left is something that is just stunning and beautiful to look at. Okay, up next at number 8, we find ourselves with Joana Choumalis. Now, when I first saw these words, two questions simultaneously popped into my mind. The first being, just how creative are these? And the second being, how has no one ever thought of this before? Both questions I feel like some of the greatest works ever made invoke. And even for not being the biggest fan of photography, seeing two of my greatest loves here, those of course being art and fashion, or more specifically in this case here, embroidery, combined in such an interesting way here is truly something special. And the fact that Joana is able to accomplish this in such a cohesive way that accents the individual parts into something more just leaves me feeling happy and inspired and wanting to see more in the future. And actually, speaking of photographers, at number 7 we have Azuma Makoto, the only solo photographer on this list. By solo, of course, I mean works that are purely and only photography. Even though these are HDR photos, HDR of course meaning high dynamic range, and if you don't know what that is and you're a fan of photography, I highly recommend looking it up. Azuma still focuses on the simplicity. What we have in these photos here is nothing more than just a little bit of water, a little bit of light, and nature's own natural beauty at its finest. Does that mean that these photos were easy to produce? No. Does it mean that these photos were easy to stage? Hell no. But the fact that they come off this way only goes to show just how much of a mastery Azuma has at this style of work. But now moving on into number 6, it is finally time to take a look at the many different painted faces of Rostarr. And seriously, take a little bit of time here It doesn't have to be more than just a couple seconds. Maybe you want to spend a whole minute, but really take a look at all of these different paintings he's done here. Whether you're an artist or not, you should at least know to some extent exactly how hard it is to master multiple different styles and disciplines. And just take a look at how many different ones he uses here. We're literally talking about dozens upon dozens upon dozens of different styles. I mean, honestly, there could be over 100 unique and different paintings here. Some are simple and others complex, some colorful and others monochromatic, and they're all detailed across a wide variety of different levels. And even though yes, some would argue that quantity doesn't always equal quantity, in this case, I'm more than willing to look the other way. Now moving into the bottom half of our list, at number 5, we have the works by Koralie. And I think we can all agree on who was the pattern winner of this year's list, can't we? But really, just how amazing are these? First off, she did an absolutely wonderful job with the color schemes here, choosing colors that not only flow together very nicely, but also pop very vibrantly to the eye. And from there, we are just overloaded with layer after layer, pattern after pattern, detail after detail. And everything here is just so clean and so meticulous and so well thought out and put together. And honestly, what else is there really to say? This work just absolutely speaks for itself. Coming in at number 4, we have the most abstract, surprisingly, artist on this list, and that is Collin Van Der Sluijs. There's just something about these works that is so inherently interesting to me that I can't help but just feel some sense of curiosity while looking all of these over. Maybe it's because he starts out with much more realistic subjects and structures and then decides to add different strokes and colors on top of them. Or maybe it's just the random bouts of lines and other elements that somehow find their way in odd places on these pieces. Or maybe it's those more classic abstract elements, such as morphing the subject's face or adding different colorful appendages and things like that. But whatever it is, once all of these things are combined, they produce something that is definitely very special, very interesting, and very worthy of being on this list. Alright guys, and we finally made it down to our final 3. And before we get into it, I do want to pause for a quick second here, because I do want to let you guys know that for as hard as this list was to make, and even for as hard as it was up until this point, these top 3 were definitely by far the hardest of all. Really, depending on the day, maybe the weather, maybe on how I feel, any single one of these artists could have been number 1, and actually was number 1 on this list at some point in time. So if you aren't the biggest fan of art and you've somehow stuck around to the end of this list up until now, well, first off, thank you. But even more so than that, if there were 3 artists that I say you must absolutely check out, it is these next 3. And starting us off at number 3 is all of the newest digital works by teamLab. Now I know I said I was only doing individual artists for this list, but seeing as how all of these people work together as a team, I mean, hell, it's in their name, this is my one and only exception. And even though I really don't feel like I have the words to express how just incredible these pieces are, I'm still gonna try. Starting off with this almost smoky and ethereal background that is quietly highlighted by these bouts of color makes for some pieces that are almost as haunting as they are beautiful. And even more amazing still is that these aren't paintings or photographs. These are digital works, which means that every single piece of art here actually moves. Yes, you actually get to watch the backgrounds breathe and watch as the petals dance in the wind and watch as the entirety of these works come to life. And to answer your question, yes, the pictures here absolutely do not do justice to these actual works. So alongside the photos in the description down below, I will of course include a link to a video of what they actually look like when they're alive. And yes, you should definitely take some time out of your day to go watch that. And honestly, it's really easy to see why this could have been number 1, and after my description, I'm still kind of surprised it's not. Okay, and now at number 2, we have some of the newest works by the artist known as Inti. Now, I will be honest with you, he was definitely by far my number 1 for the majority of last year, and just taking a look at these works, it's pretty easy to understand why. Even though these pieces might not be the most colorful or vibrant compared to many of the others on this list, I don't think anyone even comes close to comparing to how well Inti has made his colors blend here. Add to that some very interesting and realistic figures, then add some more layering to that, then add some more patterns to that, but then weave all of these things into the characters themselves in such an interesting way that you can't really tell sometimes where a pattern or subject ends and where it begins. And then add all the other minute details that bring up a sense of wonder and curiosity and interest, and a uniqueness to these works that I've never quite seen anything like before. It's honestly just astounding and about as close to flawless as any painting on this list gets, in my opinion. And finally, yes finally, here we are, the bottom of the list, number 1. My favorite artist from all of last year, and that is, of course, without a shadow of a doubt, all the newest works by Joseph Loughborough. These are just absolutely phenomenal. Once again, we see a very strong use of color mixed in with some more very eerie figures, and an absolutely extraordinary attention to detail. And it's just mesmerizing. I mean, look at these. It almost feels like when you look at the more finite details that you're looking at patterns, when in fact there aren't any. It's all just a trick of the eye. And it's just so easy to get lost in these things. It's just insane. As your eyes wander over the works here, you'll notice yourself going back and stumbling over the same detail again and again and again. And it doesn't matter how many times you look at these, everything always feels fresh and new and exciting, and it almost feels like no matter what, you're always viewing these important details for the first time. I could honestly probably find myself looking at these for hours on end and still probably never be bored of them. And I'll be honest once again, this was actually number 2 up until the actual filming of this video, or more specifically up until the actual filming of number 2 and number 1. But even for as much as I loved Inti's works and I loved teamLab's works, Joseph's works were always just cycling in the back of my mind. I just cannot get rid of them. They're always there. I always see them. And even for as great and absolutely amazing as those other works are, I always just find myself coming back to these. But with all of that now said, congratulations once again to Joseph Loughborough. You are my artist of 2018. So with that, guys, let me now pass on the questions to you. What do you think about my list? Do you agree with it? And do you disagree with it? Do you think there are some other artists that I possibly didn't see that deserve to be on this list? If so, please let me know who they are. I'm always interested in figuring out and learning about new artists. And with that, guys, thank you all once again so much for watching my videos and supporting my content. I hope you all have a great rest of the week ahead of you until I see you next. And as always, until next time.